They say old age means keeping quiet, swallowing pride to maintain family harmony. But what happens when your own flesh and blood turns you into a stranger in your own home? At 72, after decades as a devoted nurse. I stood at my front door while my daughter-in-law blocked my entry. "You won't come in until you apologize," she declared, instead of bowing my head. I chose a response that left the entire family stunned. I sold the house that very same day. My name is Evelyn Carter, and for 40 years, the house on Oak Ridge Lane was more than just walls and a roof. It was the vessel that held every precious memory of my life. Thomas and I bought it in 1982, when interest rates were crushing and everyone said we were foolish to take on such a burden. But we saw past the peeling paint and overgrown garden. We saw Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings, saw children's laughter echoing through hallways, saw ourselves growing old together on that wraparound porch. I spent 35 years as a nurse at St. Matthew's Haven, working 12-hour shifts that left my feet aching and my back screaming. But coming home to Thomas in that house made every exhausting day worthwhile. He'd be in the kitchen, flour dusting his forearms, the scent of apple pie filling every corner. "How's my favorite healer?" he'd ask, pulling me into an embrace that smelled of cinnamon and contentment. Our son David arrived after 5 years of trying, and suddenly, the house transformed. What had been our quiet sanctuary became a wonderland of first steps and bedtime stories. I can still see the smudged handprint he left on the living room wall when he was 6. I never had the heart to paint over it. That little mark became as much a part of the house as the foundation itself. The kitchen held the ghosts of 1,000 family meals. The oak dining table, scarred from decades of use, witnessed David's first words, his acceptance letter to college, his nervous announcement about proposing to Melissa. The bay window in the breakfast nook framed countless sunrises as I sipped coffee and prepared for another shift at the hospital, watching the cardinals that nested in our dogwood tree. Thomas planted that dogwood the spring after David was born. "Every boy needs a climbing tree," he said, though it would be years before the sapling could support any weight. By the time David was 10, he'd built a fort in its branches. By 20, he carved his and Melissa's initials in the trunk. Thomas pretended to be upset about the defacement, but I caught him running his fingers over those letters with a smile. The master bedroom still carried the faint scent of Thomas's cologne, even 2 years after the stroke took him. Some mornings, I'd wake expecting to find him there, his reading glasses sliding down his nose as he devoured another mystery novel. The empty space beside me felt like a canyon, but the familiar walls offered comfort. This was where we'd whispered our dreams, argued about bills, made love, and held each other through life's storms. After Thomas died, the house felt too large, too quiet. David suggested I move in with them. "Just until you adjust," he said. But I knew the truth. The maintenance was becoming too much. The gutters needed cleaning, the furnace was temperamental, and the garden Thomas lovingly tended was slowly returning to wilderness. At 72, climbing ladders and wrestling with wrenches was a young person's game. Still, leaving felt like betrayal. Every room held Thomas's fingerprints, literally in some cases, the basement workshop where he'd built David's crib, the attic where we stored 40 years of Christmas decorations, the back porch where we'd sit during thunderstorms, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder. I remember the last night in that house, walking through each room like a pilgrim visiting shrines. In David's old bedroom, rocket ship wallpaper still peeked out behind the desk. In the guest room, my mother's quilt lay folded on the bed, waiting for visitors who no longer came. In my sewing room, half-finished projects gathered dust, abandoned when arthritis made needlework impossible. The house had been our universe, expanding and contracting with the rhythms of family life. Now it would shelter strangers, people who'd never know that the squeak on the third stair meant David was sneaking cookies, or that the dining room chandelier swayed during thunderstorms because Thomas installed it himself, and engineering was never his strong suit. As I locked the door that final time, I touched the door frame where we'd measured David's height each birthday. Pencil marks climbing like a ladder to adulthood. We'll make new memories, David promised, loading boxes into the truck. I nodded and smiled, not yet knowing that memories would be all I'd have left. The first month at David and Melissa's felt like an extended visit. Melissa smiled often then, asking about my nursing days and admiring the few belongings I'd brought. "That rocking chair is gorgeous," she said, running her hands over the carved arms. "David's father made it when I was pregnant," I told her. "I rocked David to sleep in it every night." She nodded appreciatively, and I foolishly thought we were building something, but changes came like frost, gradual, then sudden. One morning, I couldn't find my rocking chair. "Oh, we moved it to the garage," Melissa mentioned casually over breakfast. It didn't match the living room aesthetic. The word aesthetic hung in the air like a slap. 40 years of memories relegated to storage because they clashed with her gray and white color scheme. My lace curtains disappeared next. I'd hung them in the guest room, now my room, to soften the stark walls. "They're a dust trap," Melissa explained, replacing them with plastic blinds that clacked in the breeze. The room felt like a hospital ward, sterile and impersonal. I bit my tongue, remembering David's plea for harmony. The kitchen became a battlefield disguised as neutral territory. I'd offer to cook Sunday dinner, the pot roast Thomas loved, recipes passed down from my grandmother. "That's sweet, but we're trying to eat healthier," Melissa would say, producing another quinoa salad. I'd watch David push food around his plate, yearning visible in his eyes for the comfort foods of his childhood. Sophie, my 8-year-old granddaughter, became my secret ally. While Melissa attended her yoga classes and wine clubs, Sophie would slip into my room. "Tell me about Grandpa," she'd whisper, and I'd spin stories of the man who would have adored her. She loved hearing about the treehouse he built, the magic tricks he performed, the way he sang off-key in the shower. One afternoon, I baked Thomas's famous apple pie for Sophie's school fundraiser. The kitchen filled with cinnamon and memories as I rolled dough the way he'd taught me. Sophie danced around the island, stealing apple slices and giggling. When Melissa returned, her nose wrinkled. "What's that smell? Not aroma, not scent, smell. Like something offensive." "Grandma made pie," Sophie announced proudly. Melissa's smile was razor thin. "How nice." Though I already ordered cupcakes from the organic bakery. They're gluten-free and sugar-conscious. She set my pie aside like an afterthought. Later, I found it in the trash, barely touched. Sophie's tears that night matched my own. My belongings vanished piece by piece. The Afghan I'd crocheted disappeared from the couch. My gardening books were boxed to reduce clutter. Even my coffee mug, world's best grandma, a Mother's Day gift from David, was replaced by matching white cups that all looked identical. "I can't find anything," I mentioned to David one evening. He looked up from his laptop, distracted. "Melissa's just trying to keep things organized. Mom, you know how she is." Yes, I knew how she was. I knew she spray-wiped the counter after I made toast, as if my crumbs carried disease. I knew she rearranged the dishwasher after I loaded it, sighing dramatically. I knew she scheduled family meetings where my presence felt like an agenda item to be managed. The birthday incident broke something inside me. David's 43rd birthday. I woke at 5 a.m. to bake his favorite chocolate cake, the one with fudge frosting he'd requested every year since he was 7. By 8 a.m., the kitchen smelled like a chocolate factory. Sophie helped me decorate, her face smeared with frosting, both of us laughing. Melissa's heels clicked across the tile like a countdown. "What's happening here?" She surveyed the chocolate fingerprints on her pristine cabinets, the flour dusting her granite countertops. "We have reservations at Laurent's tonight. I ordered a cake from their pastry chef." "But Daddy loves Grandma's cake," Sophie protested. "This is too heavy, too sweet," Melissa said, moving my creation to the back counter. "We need to think about cholesterol and calories at our age." That night at the restaurant, as waiters sang and presented architectural dessert that looked like modern art, I caught David's eye. He glanced at me, then away. But not before I saw the longing there. The little boy who licked batter from the spoon was still inside somewhere, buried under mortgage payments and marriage compromises. I began spending more time in my room, emerging only for meals and Sophie's bedtime stories. The house felt like a museum where I was an unwelcome artifact, too old and worn for display. Even my voice seemed to irritate Melissa, too loud during her conference calls, too chatty during her meditation hours. "Maybe you'd enjoy the senior center," she suggested one morning, sliding a brochure across the table. "They have activities, people your own age to talk to." The subtext was clear: anywhere but here. I smiled and nodded, the way women of my generation learned to do, while inside something harder than granite was forming. The final insult came quietly, like all the others. I overheard Melissa on the phone with her sister. 3 more months and we'll qualify for the home equity loan. Then we can finally renovate without asking permission. My house. They were planning to borrow against my house, the one Thomas and I paid for with blood and sweat, to fund Melissa's vision of perfection. That night, I sat in the garage beside my exiled rocking chair, running my hands over the smooth wood Thomas had carved with love. This wasn't about curtains or coffee mugs anymore. This was about erasure, about being rubbed out of existence like a pencil mark that marred their perfect picture. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, I would remind them whose name was on that deed. The afternoon it happened. I'd been at my monthly retirees' luncheon. Nothing fancy, just a dozen former nurses swapping stories over tuna sandwiches and coffee at the community center. Margaret was describing her new great-grandchild when Patricia, who lived 3 houses down from David, mentioned seeing my beautiful rose garden. "Those peace roses are magnificent this year," she said. "You always did have the magic touch. Evelyn." I smiled, not correcting her. Those roses hadn't been mine for months, but when she added, "Melissa told everyone at the block party that she'd cultivated that garden from scratch, said it took her 3 years to get those blooms." Something shifted inside me. "Thomas planted those roses for our 25th anniversary," I said quietly. "He ordered them special from a nursery in Oregon." The table went silent. Patricia's face reddened. "Oh, I must have misunderstood." But we all knew she hadn't. I finished my coffee, said my goodbyes, and drove home with steady hands. Though inside I was trembling, the roses were sacred. Thomas had tended them through drought and storm, pruning with the dedication of a sculptor. For Melissa to claim them as her own felt like grave robbery. I pulled into the driveway at 3:15 p.m., noticing Melissa's book club cars lining the street, through the window. I could see women clustered in the living room, wine glasses catching the afternoon light. I gathered my purse and walked to the front door. Keys ready. The door wouldn't budge. Not stuck, locked. I tried again, thinking I'd grabbed the wrong key. But no, this was the same key I'd used this morning, the one David had made for me when I moved in. I knocked, then rang the doorbell. Melissa appeared behind the glass panel, her expression unreadable. She didn't open the door, just stood there like a sentinel. I knocked again. Harder. Finally, she cracked it open. Not enough for me to enter, just enough to speak. "Yes?" she said, as if I were a salesperson or stranger. "The door is locked." I stated the obvious. Confused. "I'm aware." Her voice was crisp, each word precisely cut. "I need to come in. This is my home." "Is it?" She opened the door wider but positioned her body to block entry. Behind her, I could see her book club friends pretending not to watch. Because homeowners don't spread lies about their family to neighbors. "What are you talking about?" Patricia Hendricks just texted me. "Apparently, you've been telling people I'm some sort of fraud, that I'm claiming credit for Thomas's garden. You did claim credit. Patricia heard you at the block party. I said I've been maintaining the garden for 3 years, which is true. You twisted it into something ugly, making me look like a liar in front of the neighborhood." I stood straighter, feeling every one of my 72 years in my spine. "Thomas planted those roses. That's not a lie. That's history. History nobody needs to hear. You're living in the past, Evelyn, and dragging everyone down with you." She glanced back at her guests. You will not set foot in this house until you apologize. To me and to my friends, a full apology for attempting to humiliate me. Apologize for telling the truth. Apologize for your behavior, for the constant undermining, the subtle digs, the way you make me feel like an intruder in my own home. Your home? The words came out sharp as winter wind. My name is on the deed. Melissa, mine and David's. You're the one who— Mom? David appeared behind his wife, still in his work clothes. He must have come through the garage. What's going on? Your mother has been spreading stories about me to the neighbors, Melissa said without turning. I've asked her to apologize before entering. David's face went through several expressions: confusion, embarrassment, resignation. Mom, can you just say sorry so we can move past this? Sorry for what? For remembering who planted the roses? For existing? For causing drama, he said weakly. Please, the book club is here. Let's not make a scene. I'm not the one who locked the door. I looked at my son, searching for the boy who once defended me against playground bullies, who said I was the strongest person he knew. This tired man in a wrinkled suit wasn't him. It's just words. Mom, say them and come inside. Where's Sophie? I asked instead. At dance class. Mom, please. No. The word fell between us like a gavel. I will not apologize for Thomas's roses. I will not apologize for remembering my life, and I will not beg to enter a house I own. Melissa smiled then. A small, satisfied thing. Then you'll need to find somewhere else to stay tonight, David. Show your mother out. My son, my boy who once brought me dandelions and called them flowers, looked at me with desperate eyes. Mom, don't do this. Just apologize. It's not worth it. You're right, I said, turning away. It's not worth it at all. I walked to my car with measured steps, aware of faces in the window, watching the old woman retreat. My hands didn't shake until I was 3 blocks away, pulled into a drugstore parking lot. Then they trembled so hard I could barely dial information for nearby hotels. The cheerful voice listed options while I sat in my sedan. Homeless at 72, locked out by a woman who slept in sheets I'd gifted them for Christmas. The roses Thomas planted would bloom without me. Sophie would come home to find Grandma gone. And David would sleep peacefully beside his wife, telling himself it was for the best. But they'd forgotten something crucial. The house they treated as theirs, the equity they planned to borrow against, the roses they claimed, none of it was theirs alone. And if they wanted to lock me out, I'd show them what doors I could close in return. The motel room smelled of industrial bleach and decades of transient desperation. $64 a night at the Traveler's Rest, paid in cash because I was too proud to let a credit card statement document my humiliation. The bedspread was a pattern designed to hide stains. The carpet worn thin by countless footsteps of people with nowhere else to go. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my good luncheon dress, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. 4:17 a.m. That's when clarity arrived, sharp as a scalpel. I'd been lying awake, replaying Melissa's satisfied smile, David's weak protestations, the click of my own lock denying me entry. The red numbers on the digital clock burned through the darkness, and suddenly, I understood. They didn't want me as a person. They wanted me as a provision. My Social Security checks, my portion of Thomas's pension, and most of all, my name on that deed. I thought about calling David, explaining how it felt to be barred from the home I'd helped purchase, but I could already hear his response. Mom, you're overreacting. Just apologize and come home. As if home was a place where you needed permission to exist. By 6 a.m., I was dressed and drinking weak coffee from the motel's lobby. The desk clerk, a young man with tired eyes, didn't comment on the elderly woman who'd checked in late with no luggage. He'd probably seen worse. I asked him for the phone book. Yes, they still had one, and looked up a number I hadn't dialed in years. Richard Hale answered on the 3rd ring, his voice still commanding despite being past 70 himself. Evelyn? My God, it's been too long. Not since— He paused, respectful of Thomas's memory. Since the funeral, I finished. Richard, I need legal advice. Can I see you today? Of course. Is everything all right? No, I said simply. It's not. His office hadn't changed. Same leather chairs, same diplomas on the wall, same photo of his late wife on the desk. Richard had handled our will, our house closing, every major legal moment of our marriage. He listened without interrupting as I explained the situation. His fingers steepled beneath his chin. "They locked you out," he repeated when I finished, "of your own home." Melissa says it's her home. Maybe she's right. Maybe I'm just the ghost who pays half the mortgage. Richard pulled out a file. Thomas and Evelyn Carter written in faded ink on the tab. "Let's review the facts. The house on Oak Ridge Lane is jointly owned by you and David, correct?" "Yes. We put him on the deed 5 years ago. For estate planning. Thomas thought it would simplify things." "And you've been contributing to household expenses since moving in?" "My Social Security, part of Thomas's pension. It goes into their account for bills." Richard made notes in his precise handwriting. "Evelyn, legally speaking, you have every right to reside in that house. They cannot bar you from property you partially own." "I don't want to live where I have to threaten legal action to walk through the door." He set down his pen. "Studying me. What do you want?" The question hung between us like morning mist. What did I want? To rewind time? To have Thomas back? To find my son's spine wherever Melissa had hidden it? "I want to be free," I heard myself say. "I want to stop pretending this arrangement works. I want to stop being grateful for crumbs in a house my sweat helped buy." "You could force a partition sale," Richard said carefully. "Require them to either buy out your share or sell the property." Sell. The word tasted like liberation. "I want to sell." Richard's eyebrows rose. "That's a significant decision. Have you considered—" "I've considered sleeping in a motel that rents rooms by the hour. I've considered that my daughter-in-law threw away my dead husband's apple pie recipe. I've considered that my son watched her lock me out and asked me to apologize for the privilege. Yes, Richard, I've considered everything." He nodded slowly. "It won't be pleasant. David will have to agree or be compelled by the court. Melissa will undoubtedly make things difficult. She's already made things difficult. At least now it'll be honest." We spent 2 hours reviewing options. Richard explained forced sales, partition actions, the timeline involved. With each detail, the fantasy of harmonious family living crumbled further. But beneath the rubble, something stronger emerged. Self-respect. "There is one approach that might expedite things," Richard mentioned as I prepared to leave. "If they're planning to leverage the equity, and from what you've said about Melissa, that seems likely, they'll need your cooperation. That gives you negotiating power. They think I'll cave, that I'll come crawling back. Will you?" I thought about the motel room, the vending machine dinner I'd have tonight, the absence of Sophie's goodnight hugs. Then I thought about Thomas, who'd worked double shifts to afford that house, who'd said I was the strongest woman he knew. "No," I said, "I won't." Richard smiled, the expression of a lawyer who smelled victory. "Then let's discuss strategy. But Evelyn, are you prepared for what this means? David is your only child. David made his choice when he married her, when he let her erase me piece by piece, when he stood behind her while she locked me out. I gathered my purse, standing with more dignity than I'd felt in months. I spent 40 years building that life. Richard, if they want to lock me out of it, then I'll take the whole damn thing with me when I go." Back in the motel room, I sat at the small table and wrote 2 lists. Things I'd lost: my rocking chair, my curtains, my coffee mug, my roses, my son. Things I still had: my dignity, my memories, my name on a deed, my power to choose. The second list was shorter but weighed more. Tomorrow, I'd return to Richard's office and sign papers that would detonate the careful life Melissa had constructed. Tonight, I'd sleep in a bed that smelled like bleach and broken dreams. But for the first time in months, I'd sleep free. The papers felt heavier than their weight suggested. Each signature was a small death, of hope for reconciliation, of the grandmother I'd planned to be, of the mother who always forgave. Richard's secretary notarized with efficient clicks of her stamp while I signed my name with deliberate strokes. Evelyn Marie Carter, Still my name. Still my choice. The petition will be filed Monday, Richard explained. David will be served notice that you're initiating a partition sale. He'll have 30 days to respond, either agree to buy out your share or consent to selling. He won't have the money to buy me out. I knew my son's finances, had seen the credit card bills carelessly left on counters, Melissa's shopping bags from stores that sold handbags worth mortgage payments. Then they'll have to sell or fight it in court. Fighting will cost more than cooperating. Richard's voice carried the weight of experience. Most partition cases settle. The law is clear. Co-owners can't be forced to remain in joint ownership against their will. I left his office with copies of everything, my purse now holding dynamite in document form. The motel had become familiar over 3 days, which ice machines worked, which vending selections were least expired. The desk clerk now nodded recognition. Room 12, Mrs. Carter, same as yesterday. My phone had been silent except for messages I didn't answer. 17 from David, ranging from confused to angry to pleading. 43 from Melissa, which I deleted unread. 3 from Sophie's iPad, asking where Grandma went, those I saved but couldn't answer. What could I tell an 8-year-old? That Grandma was teaching her parents a lesson they should have learned in kindergarten, that you can't lock people out and keep their toys. On the 4th day, David found me. I was having breakfast at a diner 2 blocks from the motel when he slid into the opposite booth. He looked terrible, unshaven, wrinkled shirt, the haunted eyes of a man discovering consequences exist. Mom! Just that, like an accusation and plea combined. David! I continued spreading jam on my toast, steady hands betraying none of the earthquake inside. You can't be serious. A partition sale? You want to throw us out of our home? Funny how it's our home now. Tuesday it was Melissa's home, and I wasn't welcome. He rubbed his face, a gesture I recognized from his teenage years when calculus homework overwhelmed him. She overreacted, we both know that. But this, Mom, this is vengeful. This is business. I took a bite of toast, chewed slowly. Your wife made it clear I'm not family. Fine, then we'll handle this as a business transaction between co-owners. Sophie cries every night. She doesn't understand where you went. The words sliced deep, but I'd spent nights practicing for this moment. Sophie knows where I went. I was locked out. Her mother can explain why. You're punishing an 8-year-old for adult problems. No, David, you're allowing an 8-year-old to suffer for your wife's choices. There's a difference. He leaned forward, desperation cracking his voice. What do you want? An apology. Fine. Melissa will apologize. We'll have a family meeting. Clear the air. I want you to sign the partition agreement. I pulled Richard's card from my purse, slid it across the formica. Have your lawyer call mine. You don't mean this. Tuesday at 3:45 p.m., Melissa stood in the doorway of a house I own and told me I couldn't enter. You stood behind her and asked me to apologize for existing. Yes, David. I mean this. Where will we go? Sophie's school, her friends. Where was I supposed to go when you locked me out? It was just for one night, to teach you a lesson about... He stopped, horror dawning as he heard his own words. To teach me a lesson. I smiled without humor. Well, consider this my homework assignment. Mom, please. I'm sorry. I'm so fucking sorry. Tears now. My composed son breaking down in a public diner. I should have stood up to her. I know that, but we can fix this. Come home. To what? More erasure? More apologies for breathing? More gratitude for being allowed to exist in spaces I helped create? I finished my coffee, left money on the table. I raised you better than this. David, somewhere under Melissa's thumb is the boy who knew right from wrong. When you find him, have him call me. I stood to leave, but his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Not hard, just desperate. She'll make my life hell. Then maybe you'll understand how I felt. I pulled free gently. The house goes on the market, or you buy out my half. Those are your options. You're destroying our family. No, son. I'm acknowledging what Melissa already destroyed. I'm just doing it legally. That evening, alone in room 12, I ordered Chinese food and watched game shows. The normalcy felt surreal. Pat Sajak spinning wheels while my family imploded across town. My phone buzzed constantly. I turned it face down, imagining each vibration as another piece of Melissa's controlled world cracking. The next morning brought a development. Richard called early, amusement in his voice. David's lawyer reached out. They want to negotiate. Already? Apparently Melissa had plans for that equity. Big plans, a kitchen renovation contracted to start next month, deposits paid. Without your cooperation, they can't get the home equity loan. I thought of Melissa's granite countertops, her professional-grade appliances, all of it pristine and cold as morgue steel. Perfect. They're proposing mediation, want to avoid court costs. Fine, but I'm not backing down. Richard, either they buy me out at market value or we sell. Understood, Evelyn. You're handling this remarkably well. Was I? Or was I simply too tired for anything but truth? I spent decades handling things badly, swallowing pride, keeping peace, making myself smaller. Turns out revenge tastes better than all that silence ever did. After hanging up, I sat by the motel window, watching traffic pass, somewhere. Melissa was discovering that actions have consequences. David was learning that mothers aren't doormats, and I was learning that 72 wasn't too old to choose myself. The lock on their door had opened something in me, not rage exactly, but clarity. They'd wanted me gone? Wish granted, but I wouldn't go quietly or cheaply. Thomas's roses would bloom for strangers, but at least they'd know the truth of who planted them. And I'd rather sleep in this bleach-scented room forever than beg entry to a place where I wasn't valued. My phone lit up again. This time, the caller ID showed Sophie's iPad. I let it ring. Each unanswered trill another stone in the wall between who I'd been and who I was becoming. The doorbell rang at 10:15 a.m. sharp. Through the peephole, I saw them, a young couple, probably early 30s, her hand resting on a visible baby bump while he held a folder thick with dreams. Behind them stood Marcia Winters, the real estate agent whose smile could sell ice to Eskimos. Mrs. Carter? I'm Marcia. We spoke on the phone. Her handshake was firm, professional. This is Jennifer and Mark Thompson. They're very interested in the property. Jennifer's eyes were already drinking in details, the original hardwood floors, the crown molding Thomas installed himself, the way morning light flooded through the entry. It's even more beautiful than the photos, she breathed. Shall we start with the living room? I led them inside, my voice steady despite the thundering in my chest. David's car wasn't in the driveway. Marcia had scheduled this showing for when he'd be at work, but Melissa's Mercedes sat there like a chrome accusation. She'd know soon enough. The Thompsons followed me through rooms I'd once called home, their excitement palpable. The kitchen gets wonderful light, I explained, watching Jennifer run her fingers along the butcher block island where Sophie and I had rolled cookie dough. The window herb garden thrives year-round. Is that sage? Jennifer asked, leaning toward the plants Melissa had nearly killed twice before I quietly took over their care. Among other things, the basil is particularly happy there. Mark was examining the breakfast nook. This built-in bench is incredible. Original? My late husband built it when our son was young. The storage underneath is deceptively spacious. I didn't mention the crayon marks still visible if you knew where to look, or how David used to hide there during thunderstorms. We moved through the house like a funeral procession disguised as a tour. The dining room where 40 Thanksgivings had gathered, the powder room Thomas had retiled after David's teenage party resulted in mysterious damage. Each space held ghosts the Thompsons couldn't see. The master suite is upstairs? Marcia guided us toward the staircase. That's when we heard it. The sharp click of heels on hardwood, moving fast. Melissa appeared at the top of the stairs, her face a study in controlled fury. She'd dressed for war in a cream suit that probably cost more than my monthly motel bill, but her composure cracked at the edges. What's happening here? Each word precise as a blade, Marcia's smile never wavered. Mrs. Peterson, I'm Marcia Winters. I called yesterday about showing the house. I told you we weren't interested in viewings yet. Melissa descended slowly, intimidation in every step. Actually, I interjected, I authorized the showing. As co-owner, I have that right. The Thompsons exchanged glances. Sensing drama, Jennifer's hand moved protectively to her belly. Perhaps we should come back another time, Mark suggested. Nonsense. I touched Jennifer's arm gently. Would you like to see the garden? Thomas, my late husband, won awards for his roses. The roses aren't, Melissa started, original to the property. I continued smoothly. Planted in 1995 for our anniversary. They're heritage varieties, quite valuable to collectors. We proceeded outside, Melissa trailing like a storm cloud. The garden showed October's touch, but still impressed. Jennifer gasped at the late-blooming peace roses, their cream and pink petals defying the season. My grandmother grew these, she said softly. I've always wanted. Mark, look at this arbor. Thomas's arbor built over 3 weekends while I handed him tools and worried about his ladder placement. Now Mark studied its construction with obvious approval, running his hands over joints still solid after decades. The whole property has been meticulously maintained, Marcia noted, shooting me a conspiratorial look. She knew exactly what was happening here, had probably seen it dozens of times. Family property wars playing out in living color. We should discuss the heating system, Melissa interrupted. It needs complete replacement, and the roof had full replacement 3 years ago, I countered. All permits and warranties are in the filing cabinet. 25-year guarantee. The foundation, inspected last spring, no issues. I smiled at the Thompsons. I keep thorough records. Comes from decades in nursing. Documentation saves lives. Jennifer laughed, the sound bright in the tense air. I'm a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. I completely understand. St. Matthew's Haven for 35 years, I told her. Retired from the cardiac unit. My supervisor trained there. Martha Henley. Martha, she was my protégé. The connection warmed something frozen in my chest. This young woman carrying new life, standing in Thomas's garden. It felt like a sign. We'd like to make an offer, Mark announced suddenly. Full asking price. Melissa's intake of breath was audible. The house isn't officially for sale. This is premature. But it will be, I said quietly. One way or another. If I could have a word with my clients. Marcia herded the Thompsons toward the front yard, leaving Melissa and me alone among the roses. You vindictive bitch, she hissed, dropping all pretense. Such language. What would your book club think? You're destroying David over petty spite. I'm selling property I co-own. David's emotional state is his business. Where's your mother's heart? Throwing your own son out? I studied a rose, its petals edged brown but still holding form. My mother's heart died Tuesday at 3:45 p.m., when you locked it out. What's left is a property owner protecting her assets. I'll fight this, every step. With what money? The deposits you put on kitchen renovations you can't afford without my signature? Her flinch told me Richard's intelligence was accurate. Fight all you want, Melissa. The law is clear. David's car screeched into the driveway, his door slamming. He'd left work, probably racing here after Melissa's panicked call. But I was already walking toward the front yard, where the Thompsons waited with barely contained excitement, and Marcia prepared offer paperwork on her car's hood. Mom! David's voice cracked across the lawn. Mom, stop! I didn't turn. Behind me came the sound of my son's world crashing down. Ahead lay strangers who'd fill this house with new laughter, new memories, new roses blooming over old roots. Between the two, I stood in the October sun and felt something I hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Free. Mrs. Carter, Jennifer said as I approached. We'd like to close as soon as possible. I'm due in February, and setting up the nursery in that beautiful corner room. The one with morning light. I nodded. Perfect for a baby. My David spent his first years there. Behind us. Melissa's voice rose in fury. David's in pleading, but I kept my eyes on the future. Jennifer's eager face, Mark's steady presence. The promise of this house, sheltering love again instead of whatever poisoned thing my family had become. The dining room table where countless family dinners had unfolded now held a different feast. paperwork that would sever 40 years of memories. Jennifer and Mark sat across from me, their attorney beside them, while Marcia organized documents with practiced efficiency. The October sun slanted through windows I'd cleaned weekly for decades, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny witnesses. "The sellers have agreed to a 30-day close," Marcia explained, sliding papers toward me. "Given the cash offer and waived inspection contingency, we can move quickly." My pen hovered over the signature line. Such a small gesture to end so much history. Behind me, I could hear Melissa's voice from the kitchen, sharp with hysteria. "This is insane! She can't do this!" David appeared in the doorway, his face gray with shock. "Mom, please, can we talk? Just 5 minutes. We're in the middle of signing," I said without looking up. 5 minutes, I'm begging you." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. "We could take a break." "No need." I signed my name with flourishing strokes, Evelyn Marie Carter, 72 years old, reclaiming her power one letter at a time. "Mom," the word tore from David's throat. Now I looked at him, this stranger wearing my son's face, this man who'd chosen comfortable cowardice over difficult truth. "Yes? How can you sit there and Sophie's upstairs crying? Do you know that? She heard everything and now she's terrified we're going to be homeless." "Then perhaps you should comfort your daughter instead of harassing your mother." "You're not acting like a mother. You're acting like someone who owns half this house and is exercising her legal rights." I turned back to the papers. "Yes, exactly like that." Mark cleared his throat. "If this is a bad time, it's the perfect time," I assured him. "My late husband would have loved knowing a young family would fill these rooms again. He built that treehouse in the backyard, dreaming of grandchildren playing in it." "Grandchildren you're now displacing," Melissa spat from behind David. "Grandchildren whose mother locked me out." Interesting how displacement feels, isn't it? Where will we go? David's shoulders sagged. "Mom, where are we supposed to go?" The same question I'd asked myself in that motel room. The same bewilderment I'd felt standing on the doorstep. Key useless in my hand, there are many homes for sale. David, I'm sure Melissa can find one that matches her aesthetic. With what down payment? "You know we used our savings for Melissa's renovations." "Yes, I'm aware." I signed another page. "Perhaps her book club friends can help." Jennifer reached across the table suddenly, covering my hand with hers. "Mrs. Carter, I promise we'll take care of this house. The roses, the memories, we'll honor them." Her touch nearly undid me, this stranger offering more warmth than my own family had in months. "The peace roses need pruning in February," I managed, "and the David Austins are susceptible to black spot if you don't spray early. I'll learn everything," she promised. "My grandmother would haunt me if I let heritage roses die." "Mom," David again, but softer now, defeated. "Is this really what Dad would want?" Now I did turn, meeting his eyes fully. "Your father would want me treated with dignity in a home we built together. Failing that, he'd want me to protect myself, which is what I'm doing. By destroying your family? By acknowledging what's already destroyed. I'm just handling the estate sale." Sophie appeared then, slipping past her parents to run straight to me. 8 years old in unicorn pajamas, face streaked with tears. "Grandma, why are you selling our house?" The room held its breath. Even Melissa stayed silent, watching to see if a child's tears would accomplish what adult manipulation couldn't. I pulled Sophie onto my lap, feeling her trembling. "Do you remember the story of the hermit crab?" She nodded against my shoulder. "Sometimes hermit crabs outgrow their shells. It's scary to leave, but staying hurts worse than going. This house has become too small for all of us, sweetheart. But where will we live? Your parents will find a beautiful new house, and I'll find a place where I fit just right. Will I still see you? That depends on your parents." I looked over her head at David and Melissa. "I'll always want to see you. Always. Promise, promise. Grandma loves you more than all the roses in the garden." She squeezed me tight, and I breathed in her strawberry shampoo scent, memorizing it. Then Melissa stepped forward. "Sophie, come here. Let Grandma finish her business." The word dripped contempt, business, as if dismantling a life was merely transaction. Sophie reluctantly moved to her mother, but kept watching me with Thomas's eyes in a face that might someday show Melissa's hardness. I prayed it wouldn't. I signed the last papers with Sophie's gaze upon me. Each signature was a door closing. No, a door opening. The Thompsons would paint Sophie's room, hang new curtains, create new traditions. The treehouse would shelter different children. The roses would bloom for hearts that might appreciate their true origin. "Congratulations," Marcia said to the Thompsons. "You've bought a wonderful home." They shook my hand, Jennifer's eyes wet with understanding. She saw what this cost. Even if my own family couldn't, or wouldn't, I stood, gathering my purse. The house manual is in the kitchen drawer. Warranties, maintenance schedules, paint codes. The previous owner's contact information is there too, in case questions arise. "Previous owners?" David asked bitterly. "You mean us?" "I mean the Thompsons." I checked my watch. 11:47 a.m., pending close. I walked toward the door. Each step measured. Behind me erupted chaos. Melissa shrieking about lawyers, David pleading for reason, Sophie crying, but I didn't turn back. I'd turned back too many times, excused too much, accepted too little. At the door, I paused. "David, that key you gave me, the one that didn't work Tuesday, you should give it to the Thompsons. They'll need all the copies." Then I walked out of the house Thomas and I built, where we'd raised our son, where I'd been systematically erased until only my signature mattered. The October air tasted like freedom and loss, bitter and clean. Behind me, my family fell apart. Ahead, the road stretched toward whatever came next. I'd been locked out. Now I held all the keys. The afternoon sun painted long shadows across the driveway as I walked away from everything I'd known. My car waited like a patient friend, ready to carry me toward whatever came next. Behind me, the house erupted with sounds of a family imploding, Melissa's sharp accusations, David's desperate pleading, and underneath it all, Sophie's heartbroken sobs. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. Each step was deliberate, measured, the walk of a woman who'd finally learned her worth at 72. The keys jingled in my purse, not house keys anymore, just car keys and the motel room that had become my temporary refuge. Strange how losing access to one door had opened so many others. As I reached my car, David burst from the house. Mom, wait!" I paused, hand on the door handle, but didn't turn. "The business is concluded. David." "Business? Is that what we are now? Business?" His voice cracked like a teenager's, reminding me of the boy who once cried over scraped knees and broken toys. Now I did turn. My son stood on the walkway Thomas had laid stone by stone, his face a portrait of too late realization. Behind him, Melissa watched from the doorway. Her perfect facade finally cracked. "We became business the moment your wife made it transactional," I said calmly. When my worth was measured in Social Security deposits and signature authority, rather than 40 years of love and sacrifice. She never meant, yes, she did. "And you let her." I opened my car door. "You stood behind her while she locked me out. You asked me to apologize for existing." "Well, David, I exist, with or without your permission. Where will you go?" The question hung between us like morning mist. Where does a 72-year-old woman go when she's burned the bridge to her only family? Where does a mother's heart rest when it's been evicted from its home? "Forward," I said simply. "I'm going forward." "Mom, please. The Thompsons have young children. They'll fill that house with laughter again. Sophie will make friends with them. Life will go on." I settled into the driver's seat. Your father would be heartbroken by what happened here. David, but he'd understand why I did it. This isn't you. This cruelty. Cruelty? I started the engine. Cruelty is erasing someone piece by piece. Cruelty is making an old woman beg to enter her own home. What I did was business. Clean, legal, final. Melissa stepped out then, pulling Sophie behind her. My granddaughter broke free, running toward the car. "Grandma! Grandma! Don't go!" Every instinct screamed to gather her up, to promise everything would be okay. but I'd spent too many years making false promises, smoothing over rough truths. I love you, Sophie. Remember that. No matter what happens, Grandma loves you. Then why are you leaving? Because sometimes loving someone means showing them that actions have consequences. Someday, when you're older, you'll understand. I don't want to understand. I want you to stay. Melissa caught up, pulling Sophie back. You see what you're doing, the trauma you're causing? I met her gaze steadily. Yes, I see exactly what I'm doing. I'm refusing to be erased. I'm choosing dignity over degradation. I'm teaching my granddaughter that even grandmothers deserve respect. By making us homeless? By selling property I partially own? You're not homeless. Melissa, you're inconvenienced. There's a significant difference. I put the car in reverse, slowly backing out of the driveway where I'd parked for 40 years. David stood frozen, a man watching his carefully constructed life crumble. Melissa held Sophie, who reached toward my car with both hands. The house rose behind them, solid and welcoming, waiting for the Thompsons to write new stories within its walls. As I drove away, I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I'd spent enough time looking backward, trying to preserve something already lost. The motel waited, yes, but beyond that, apartments to view, a life to rebuild, freedom to explore. At 72, I was homeless but not hopeless, displaced but not defeated. My phone buzzed constantly as I drove. David's number, Melissa's, even Sophie's iPad. I turned it off. There would be time for conversations later, after the dust settled, after they understood this wasn't a tantrum, but a transformation. Or perhaps there wouldn't be. Perhaps this was how our story ended, with locks and lawyers instead of love and reconciliation. The sun was setting as I pulled into the motel parking lot. The desk clerk nodded his familiar greeting. Room 12, Mrs. Carter? Actually, I heard myself say. I'll be checking out tomorrow. Time to find something more permanent. He smiled, understanding flickering in his young eyes. Good for you, ma'am, good for you. In my room, I sat on the bed and finally let the tears come. Not tears of regret. Those had all been shed. These were tears of grief for the family that could have been, should have been, but never was. Tears for Thomas, who'd built a house meant to shelter love but couldn't build hearts capable of holding it. Tears for Sophie, innocent victim of adult failures. But underneath the sadness, something else bloomed. Pride, satisfaction, the fierce joy of a woman who'd finally said enough. They'd told me I couldn't come in until I apologized. Instead, I'd sold the entire house. Let them apologize to the Thompsons for the inconvenience of moving. Let them explain to Sophie why Grandma's roses would bloom in someone else's garden. I opened my laptop and began searching for apartments, small ones, with good light and no room for anyone to erase me. Places where I could hang my lace curtains and drink from whatever mug I chose, where my rocking chair could sit wherever I pleased, and no one would exile it to a garage. Tomorrow would bring paperwork and packing, decisions and new directions. But tonight, in this bleach-scented room that had witnessed my transformation, I raised a paper cup of vending machine coffee and a toast. To locked doors, I whispered, and to the women who refused to beg for keys. The coffee was terrible, the bed uncomfortable, the future uncertain. But for the first time since Thomas died, I felt alive, fully, fiercely, unapologetically alive. They'd locked me out, yes, but in doing so, they'd set me free. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't anger or retaliation. Sometimes it's simply refusing to shrink, refusing to apologize for existing, refusing to let anyone, even family, diminish your worth. At 72, I'd learned the most valuable lesson of all. A woman who knows her value is dangerous. And I was finally dangerous. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect with fellow listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Evelyn's decision. What would you have done in her situation? Your stories and perspectives make our community richer.